So this is a continuation of last week. So if you didn't listen to last week, you'll be a little bit lost, but I'll do a little bit of, I knew nobody would listen to it. So I knew nobody would though, but somebody did. So he didn't. So also Ruth Ellen and Louise, Jordan can show you how to get on to watch it live or to listen to it or watch it later if you want. Just okay, yeah, whatever.
It's not like Zoom or anything.
Yes, it is Zoom.
It is Zoom.
Yeah.
And
So
if you're on the email list, you get the beforehand login.
well, your husband is on the email list. You're not.
Yeah.
So I thought it was Louise.
It's Weezer Newman.
Oh, okay. No wonder I couldn't find it. Where is your husband? Did he get raptured?
I don't know.
I'm hoping somebody else would go if, you know, if Bill got raptured. Okay. So, all right. And L1 over there has a fabulous new Bible, a Sefer Bible, and show the cover. It has the Aleph Tav on it, which we've talked about at length before. And it's, she was asking about, you know, why the King James originally had 80 books in it, and now it only has 66, and where the other, you know, bunch went. So that's an easy, effective way to get, I think it has how many, 87 or 81, you know, it has all sorts of extra biblical text in it. And it's got all the Hebrew names are in Hebrew or Greek, so you can follow along, and it's got all the Aleph Tavs in it, and it's just a cool Bible. So my thought is sooner or later, China or Russia is going to send over an EMP and, you know, try to destroy all the electronics. And we'll be, you know, we might be okay up here because it's all line of sight. And of course, living in the mountains is, you know, the EMP is only going to work as well as your phone works up here, which isn't that awesome. Yeah, there you go. But, you know, if it did actually work and it took out all your computer programs and stuff, everything I do is on computer. And I've been thinking, what's the best way to collect all the books that I need? You know, and it'd be hundreds of books. And at $35 a copy, it's like, I can't do that. Plus I can't carry 200 books. So the Sefer Bible has a whole bunch of extra biblical books that are all in one place and handy. And I'm not saying they're absolutely, you know, inspired, but they're very cool to read, and they enlighten you in a lot of different ways and all that stuff. And I have slipped a lot of that in over the last years, and you just not know. But I mean, I tell you sometimes I got this from, you know, the Targum of Onkelos or the Targum of Jonathan or something. But there's a lot of truth out there that passed our little 66 book Bible thing. So anyway, that's a cool Bible. It's $90 though, but it's very cool. Okay, so this is going to continue from last week. We're good to go or not? Yeah. Okay. All right. So if you didn't get last week, I would encourage you to listen to last week at some point to make sense of it. But I started with a thing. Oh, is Erdogan up there? Okay. That is the Turkish president, Erdogan. And we talked about him last week, except that's not really Erdogan. That is a hologram of Erdogan, because he was supposed to address this meeting of all his, you know, mayors that are following along with him, and didn't want to or whatever, you know, go there. So he appeared as a 20-foot tall Erdogan and gave his speech that way. And it's just, you know, when I was a kid in the 60s, late 60s, my dad at the time worked for GMDRL, the Defense Research Laboratories. Bill worked across the street at Raytheon somewhere. Same deal. And one of my dad's best friends, who used to go to their house all the time, quit GM and went to work for Disney Studios. And he was the guy who did the holograms. And I don't know if you've ever, I can't remember ever doing it, but in one of the rides, the haunted house or something, there's all these, you know, things, and you know, your roller coaster car goes actually through the people, and, you know, okay, well, those are all holograms. And that was in the 60s. Right, so the technology has come quite a ways, and that's Erdogan giving his speech as a 20-foot tall hologram in this theater where all these people are gathered. And I only mention it because it's pertinent to what we're going to get to, probably not tonight, but maybe next week, about some of the stuff that's coming, and we're talking about the deception. And of course, we really don't know what the deception can be, but I think it's prudent to at least think about it and consider that there are going to be things that we're going to be confronted with, that if you just stick to your little flannel graph Christianity, that's what they teach you in Sunday school, and all of a sudden some of these things fall outside that, you're going to be, oh, that's not right. Well, what if it is right? What if it's wrong? How will you know? Right? So we're trying to talk a little bit about truth and how you know and all that stuff. So last week, in place of Erdogan, I had a little thing said truth, the new hate speech, and then under it was a quote from George Orwell. It said something like, "In an age of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act." And that's where we are. We're, because now you can't tell the truth. You're censored from Facebook, from Twitter. No news will report it. Entire events happen in the world, and most people will never know about it because their sources of information have blocked it all. So how do you know what truth is? And as I was considering that, I thought I should just see if George Orwell actually said that. Typically I do that before I put him on, but I didn't that week because it just seemed so George Orwell, right? So I looked it up. He did not say that. So when we talk about truth, just by looking it up on the lying internet. And they said he didn't say it. But what he said, if you've read 1984, 1984 is obviously about this dystopian society to come, which I think we're headed for and live partially in. And the deal was the guy, the head guy, the main actor, the protagonist, was falling in love with this woman. Well, in 1984, you can't do that. There's, you simply can't do that. They appoint you everything. They tell you where to work, where to go, what to think, who to be with, all that stuff. So he fell in love with this woman. So it's about this true love, right? This truth of love. And he said, this is a revolutionary idea, or this is a revolutionary concept. And so out of that came this saying that telling the truth, in times of deceit is a revolutionary act. And when you start looking at it, people have said that since the 1800s. Whatever, it was used for the women's suffrage, and it was used for, everything. So this idea that telling the truth is a revolutionary act in certain times of deceit is not new. And I remember when I was a youngster, there were bumper stickers, at least in California, that said this: in times of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. So every sticker slapper would use it for whatever their cause was. The anti-war people, the hippie people, the drug culture, whatever. They all felt that what they were doing and saying and thought was truth, and all these people that were against them were not. So this concept of telling the truth in an age of deceit is an act of revolution is, yeah, it's exactly the same. It's never changed. So that's my point, is he didn't actually say that, but he said enough of it so that you know that it was the intent. It was certainly the intent of the book, 1984. So is it a lie? I don't know. He didn't say it. So technically it's a lie. But the idea is correct, and everybody knows it's correct. So is it a lie? And that's the world we live in today. How do you even know what the truth is? It seems right. I have my neighbors across the street with their Biden signs and all that stuff. Perfectly lovely people, love them to death. They've been my neighbors for 15 years or more. They're just delightful. I work with her all the time. She's a faux finish painter and all the job sites and stuff. It's not that we don't get along, but how can you put that sign out there? They will tell you that, oh no, we need to save the baby seals and we need to save the baby whales, but we need to kill all the human children.
Yeah.
Or, it's schizophrenic. Yeah. And I can go through 6 or 7 of those, common ones, right? They hate, I don't even think they're married. They've been together forever and have 2 adorable children and a number of dogs and stuff. I don't think they're married. because it doesn't matter to them. They don't get why it makes any difference. But they will fight you to the death that gays should be able to get married.
Yeah.
And everything about it is like that. So in their mind, they believe it's true. They've never actually thought it through to the end, I guess. Is how schizophrenic is it what they believe. So I was going to write an editorial in the paper, which I knew they would never print, saying if you're a sleazeball contractor, one of those seal coat guys or whatever, and you need some pigeons, look for the signs, because the most schizophrenic people in the neighborhood, right? They put a sign in their front yard. But anyway, the point is, how do you know the truth? It's hard, right? You have to have some sort of baseline, or there is a truth. There is truth in the universe. How do you know what it is? Oh, go to the fact checkers. Okay, so what'd you get up there? 153? Okay. If you go to that website, which is a great website, by the way, it's a site that it isn't censored and they say anything. Okay. If you go to that and you look up this Ben Swan guy and Facebook fact checkers, and he gives you all the data on how fact checkers work. And how most fact checkers work today is somebody says something, so they have to check and see if it's true. So the way that they check and see if it's true is they Google things or search things that have said that. So what they wind up doing is, if they can find other people who have made the same comment, then it's true. They never go to the source documents to see if it was really said, or if the person they identified really said it. So it's like, how can you be that careless and that stupid? And I guess most of it's because the people that they send their information to are that careless and that stupid. They don't have they don't care. As long as somebody tells them it's true, then it's got to be true. They don't want to check. They don't want to spend the time. They want to believe what they want to believe. And that's what people do. They believe what they want to believe. So this Ben Swan guy, he digs through and all this stuff, and he finds out that the Gates Foundation and Bill Gates, and the gates of hell won't prevail. Okay. Long story. Finds out that Bill Gates has given almost $1 billion, 250 million to this group, 20 million to that group, 100 million to that group, of fact checkers to make sure that they check the facts correctly, the way he wants them checked. So there are very few companies that actually come up with a source document to see so if any of these fact checkers on TV or anything, if they're telling you something and they can't show you the source document from what he actually said, it's probably a lie, because nobody's done the research. Well, that's the way we live our life. Oh, and if you're on this website, you can also look for an old man in a chair. He's the coolest. The English guy just tells it like it is. He's an old doctor. His name's Vernon Coleman. Each one's like 15 minutes. It's worth listening to. But that's how it is today. The truth is sort of fluid, and it's definitely hidden. And when the truth doesn't jive with what the enemy is telling you is true, then they can bury it. Now they just delete it. They can delete it off your internet. They can delete it from your Twitter account. They can delete it from whatever source of information you get. Most news stations won't print it. None of the news stations have been talking, not 1 second about all these revelations about Hunter Biden and all the money he's getting, and nobody. So most of the country has no clue that's going on. So they have there's no basis for truth in their world, but they don't know there's no basis of truth. So our basis of truth comes, of course, from God, from the scripture, from the things that he's written down. And we have to, your life is meaningless if those things are not true, because we would have no anchor. There would be nothing that we would know for sure. So we have to trust that those things are true, and that forms our foundation for truth. Well, yeah, that was Goebbels and Hitler and all that stuff. And it's true. You see all these people just repeating the same thing over and over and over, hundreds, thousands of times. And it's like, how many times are you going to tell me that? It was a lie the first time you told me. It's still a lie. I know that. What kind of person can be convinced by that? I guess the kind of person that can be convinced to vote for somebody just by seeing a sign. Doesn't tell them anything about the person, what they think, what they do. It's just their name. Oh, I like that name. I'm going to vote for that. Okay, so we talked about a bunch of stuff last week that things that we understand from Scripture, and perhaps we understand them incorrectly, or we don't understand the fullness of the picture. And part of that is because we understand what we want to believe. Part of it, I think the larger part of it, is because we're taught what these things mean. And we're often taught that way by denominational teachers or pastors. You know, every pastor has learned what he thinks he knows from somebody else. And that guy learned it from somebody else. And if they all go to the same seminary, they all learn the same thing. Well, what if that's not right? And you trust him because he's a pastor, or because he's your father, or because he's your friend. You know, well, that doesn't make it true. So how do you know? And you know, one of the things we tend to believe is that the Antichrist will be European from the revived Roman Empire, right? And we get that from Daniel chapter 7, and you can read that on your own. I think we might have read it last week. And that understanding is, part of that understanding is on pretty solid ground. You read all through Daniel, and it talks about what can only be the Roman Empire. So we assume from that then that the Antichrist will be Roman or European, right? But the thing that we miss, and we talked about this last week, is that the Roman Empire is a pretty big place, and it covered much of the then known world. And we think of the Roman Empire, the capital is Rome, right? That's why they call it the Roman Empire. Except for 1400 years, it wasn't. It was Constantinople. Constantinople was the capital of the Roman Empire until it ended. It was a lot longer than Rome. It's always been the capital of the Roman Empire. Well, Constantinople is now called Istanbul. It's in Turkey. So if the Antichrist comes from the revived Roman Empire, he's Syrian. He's Turkish, probably. And that makes a whole lot more sense, because we have this idea of a revived Roman Empire, and the Antichrist is European or Roman, and we have to jump through all kinds of hoops to make that fit. But if we find out he's Turkish, and this revived Roman Empire is actually the revived Ottoman Empire, it makes a ton more sense, because the Bible is Middle Eastern centric, not European centric, not American centric. So that was going to be my starting point for what was going to be tonight, and then I just went totally off the rails. So we'll get to that, maybe even tonight, probably not. Okay, so Revelation chapter 11. It tells us that there's going to be two witnesses, right? And these two witnesses are going to be witnessing for how long? Anybody know? 3.5 years. Thank you so much. The Bible scholar in the corner. 3.5 years. I never thought that. I mean, I don't know why. I don't think anybody ever told me different. It's just like you're thinking, okay, a witness comes down from the Lord, speaks about things of the Lord. They can't kill him immediately. They kill him. He gets taken up back to heaven. Well, how long can that take? You know, well, 3.5 years apparently. Then chapter 12, the next chapter, tells us that the Hebrews will flee into the wilderness for 3.5 years. 3.5, 7. Is that the 7 years? Is it from the time the witnesses come until the Hebrews flee into the, we learn from Matthew 24, flee into the mountains. It says wilderness in Revelation. Matthew clears it up and says mountains. We think that's Petra, Jordan, which is a whole nother topic. Okay, there's 7 years. And in the middle of that, the two witnesses are killed, stand up 3.5 days later, freak everybody out, go back up to heaven, and everything changes. Well, if we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, then when would we go? Then at the witnesses, at the revealing of the Antichrist. You know, we went through this for several weeks, and not 4 weeks, 5 weeks, of different ways to look at end times positions and whatnot. And the one thing that we really never talked about, well, we talked about it a little with the mid-trib guy, I think, is when does the 7 years start? And we all think, because of the verse that we read in Thessalonians, that we are not appointed unto wrath, that it starts before the trouble. Well, I don't know. My Bible says you're appointed unto tribulation. Life is not a rose garden. Just because you know him, it does not alleviate your suffering and problems and stuff. You are going to have tribulation. Well, we talked about this last week. Tribulation and wrath, two different words mean two different things. Well, they're not just randomly sprinkled throughout Scripture. The word tribulation is used all the way through the first part of Revelation. And then from then on, the word wrath is used. You don't ever get wrath and tribulation at the same time. So those two things are different. Tribulation means what you think it means. It means trouble. Things are going to be problematical. You're going to have, all kinds of stuff. Anything can fall into tribulation. Wrath is a whole different deal. It means passion and desire. It's God's passion and desire that his people join him. And to that end, he's going to do whatever is required to do to get his people to make that decision. And those people who don't make that decision, they got to go somewhere too. So this whole idea of tribulation and wrath kind of changes a little bit of what we're talking about. Anyway, Revelation chapter 13, the next chapter, is the famous mark of the beast chapter, right? Revelation 14 is the one that actually tells you what the rapture will look like. The guy with the golden crown sitting on the cloud with the sickle, and when the grapes are full, when the harvest is ready, he reaches the sickle in and takes those that are ready. And then the very next sentence, the very next verse, talks about another guy with a sickle on the same cloud who goes in and reaps those that are left, presumably, and they go into the winepress of wrath. And they get squeezed in the winepress until the blood is up to the horses' bridles. Okay, well, that's clearly two different results. Two different deals, two different results. And we read it, Revelation 14, I think it's maybe 7 through 11 or something. No, it's maybe 14 through 17 is the rapture. I mean, what we would call the rapture, where the guy with the gold crown on the cloud and the sharp sickle reaps the grapes that are full and takes us up. And then from 18 through 21, you've got this other guy with a sharp sickle who reaps, and they go the other way. So as we read that, they're right in order. I mean, there's no space between them. Does it happen at the same time immediately? Is it just like we read it? One goes, one goes. Because that would change how we view the end of time, right? Because we don't typically see, or most people don't typically see, the taking away of the church at the same time as the actual destruction of the evil ones. That's at the end. And we kind of think of the taking of the church at the beginning. But as we read it, they follow, there's not even a comma between them. It's just sort of one thought. So how does that figure? And the question boils down to, and it's always boiled down to, is the book of Revelation chronological? And there are things like this that cause people to say, no, it can't be. But there are an increasing number of people who say, yes, it is chronological. And just because you're reading things like this right in a row doesn't mean there's not a space of time between the two verses, right? There could be 7 years or more between, or 3.5 years, or there could be 20 minutes between the guy with the golden crown on the cloud reaping the harvest of the grapes that are full and taking them up, and then the next guy reaping and sending them down. Well, it's not clear. It doesn't say how long it is. You have to sort of extrapolate that from the other stuff. So what I thought I might do tonight, which is where I went off the rails, is if this picture of the rapture occurs in chapter 14, I want to look quickly at some of the things that happen after it, and then some of the things that happen before it, just to get a sense of, is this really chronological? So chapter 15, the one after the rapture, We learn about the angels and the 7 last plagues, and we learn about the redeemed singing the song of Moses, which would make sense after the rapture because they're redeemed. Chapter 16, we learn about the 7 angels are now pouring out their plague on earth, but it's wrath, not tribulation. This is a different deal. This isn't just, hard stuff that happens to Christians. 17, Babylon is fallen, and we learn of 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is to come. Chapter 18 is sort of the requiem for the dead of Babylon. Most will die. And it says, for in 1 hour so greater riches have come to naught. Chapter 20, we learn of the angel with the key to the bottomless pit, and the enemy will be released for a short time after 1,000 years. Chapter 21 is the new heaven and the new earth. Chapter 22 is the river of life, no more curse. Blessed is he that keeps the word of the prophecy of this book. I am the Aleph and Tav, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Surely I come quickly. That's the end of the book, right? So all of those things we just talked about happen after the rapture, or what's pictured as the rapture in chapter 14. So if you're writing your letter to your sister, and these are just letters that I'm encouraging people to write about, when we're gone, they're going to be here. How do we explain to them where we went? And I think it's worth our time to do that. Those are things that will happen after we're gone. All of those things that I just mentioned. So is Revelation chronological? Well, it seems to be. I mean, that pretty much makes sense. The order of those things seems to follow one after another. So that might indicate that it's certainly pretty chronological. There's things we have to fit in there. The abomination of desolation, which presumably will happen at the death of the witnesses, and the Antichrist makes himself known into the temple and declares himself to be God. There's things that we need to work out. But if the rapture is in 14 and all those things happen after that, what happens before that? Those are things that we will experience. So chapters 1 through 3 are, of course, an overview of the churches. And you go through, Pergamos and Thyatira and Smyrna and, Philadelphia and all of the 7 churches. And have you ever noticed where those churches are? They're all in Turkey. The path is north of Israel and through what we call Asia Minor now. It's Turkey. They're all in Turkey, which I found to be interesting. They're all Assyrian. Chapter 4, John is taken up into heaven to see what shall come to pass. Chapter 5, we learn of the title deed of the earth, and only Yeshua can open it and take ownership. Chapter 6, we learn of the 7 seals and the 4 horsemen. And it's interesting. How many times, Billy Graham wrote a book, right? The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. How many times have you seen that picture, that painting? The 4 horsemen riding out, the red horse and the black horse and the white horse, the pale horse. The white horse, look that up. Of course, it's in Greek, so you have to look it up and see what it means. And it says in 3 lexicons that I looked at, of uncertain affinity. We don't really know what it means. We think it's a horse, a guy on a horse, right? It's simple. We don't even need to think about it. So it's interesting, if you go back to Hebrew, one of the words for white is Lavan, right? Laban, the brother of Rebekah, father of Rachel and Leah. And we've talked about this before. His name is white in the sense of a tempered brick. You make a brick out of mud, you throw it in the fire, you temper it, it turns white because it's burned. And the idea of a brick is always the idea of a tyrant. The idea of God is a rock, right? We're all different. We're rocks. That's why when you make an altar, you have to use rocks. You have to use stones, Eben, contraction of Father and Son. You have to use stones that have not been chiseled or cut, because that's the picture of God's people. They're all different, and we're not supposed to cut them and chisel them and make them fit in whatever the owner of the building wants it to be. But if you're a tyrant like Nimrod or the Pharaoh or whatever, you make them out of bricks, and it doesn't matter. You pull that brick out, replace it with another one. They're all the same. You don't matter. You're totally unimportant. You're not an individual. You just simply don't. You're a thing. You're just a building block for a tyrant. So when you get this idea of Laban, white, Laban, however you want to say it, it's this idea of a brick. Well, that's a bad, bad thing. And then you get, Hebrew for horse is sus. And we get sus all the time. The sus is still used in the IDF has, they call different things sus and Merkava, and they use all these old terms out of the Tanakh. And it's horse, but it doesn't mean horse. It actually means separate or to be separated. So this white horse thing is this idea of a tyrant separating the people. And that's what tyrants do, right? They seek to separate us from our God. They seek to separate us, currently from our job, from our health, from whatever it is. That's what tyrants do. They want to separate us. And that's actually, I think, a better picture of a white horse than the actual horses that you see galloping away. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but in Ezekiel and in Zechariah, there are also 4 horses or 4 creatures, or, is this the same thing? And I would suggest in some cases that it is. And we can, but in Ezekiel, or is it Zechariah? One of them, it describes 4 creatures. It doesn't say 4 horses. And they're described, he describes them, with eyes and all 4, and all this stuff. Well, that's not a horse. That's not anything that we're familiar with, but it does fit into this idea of a tyrant separating. It's a deal. It's a thing, and you'd be scared of it, and you wouldn't immediately know what it is. So, okay. So the first horse, the white horse, whatever it is, and read it in Ezekiel, and you get a much better picture of what it is, and it's not something you want to run into in a dark corner. He comes to conquer. He has a crown, and he comes conquering and to conquer, it says. So what does that mean? That's not a good thing, right? The second horse, the red horse, is violence and war. And I would guess that if Trump wins, you're going to see violence like you've never seen before in this country. Things are just going to blow up and burn. And I'd be curious to see if Biden wins, if the same thing will happen, because they'll feel emboldened that they can do it. So I think either way, this country is facing violence like we've never known. We see it in 38 or 40 cities now. Well, you don't see it because most news places don't report it. But if you have the ability to get on with people in those areas or find out what's going on, it's bad. These cities are burning. People are dying, and nobody's doing anything about it, right? Well, that's the violence of the red horse. Oh, yeah. He wants everybody to get a vaccine, everybody wear a mask.
Yeah.
It's separate. That's the whole purpose, right? Is the tyrant needs to separate you. And it's just infuriating to me that most churches have declared themselves non-essential and have just closed down or cooperated or whatever. I mean, how is that even possible? These are the churches of the living God, and they're acting like they work for the other team. So I suspect perhaps they do, but that again, we could spend months on that. The black horse is the third horse. He comes with a balance, with a measure. For what? What's he measuring? And it goes on to say when he comes, a week's wages or a day's wages will buy a loaf of barley bread, not even real bread, barley bread. So it's the implication is that there will be this runaway inflation, but he's got these scales. And of course that would be, you weigh out the barley and you pay your money, you pay your day's worth of wages, and you get your single loaf's worth of barley. But if it scales, is it possible he's coming to balance us, to weigh us, to see how we measure up, how God's people measure up? And currently, not that well.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
expecting the Lord possibly come in.
That was my hope.
That was what we were hoping. Now, in that scenario, if the Lord comes down to gather us, are we in all this turmoil?
Apparently. Well, I don't think the Lord comes to gather us. It says we meet him in the air. And that's one of those things that everybody says, oh, when the Lord comes, right?
Yeah.
Well, the Lord's not really coming. I mean, he will eventually. He comes at the end. He doesn't come in the beginning. He comes at the end.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, we meet him in the air. So I hear so many Christians, and I know that they're not, this isn't like a theological diatribe, but it irritates me nonetheless. They say, oh, I'm waiting for the return of the Lord. Well, that's at the end. Do you really want to go through all this stuff? I mean, maybe, but that's not what they mean, and I get that. They're waiting for the Lord to take them up. But they say it wrong, and that goes back to this idea of truth. Well, yeah, I don't want to be in that mess either. But why say I'm waiting for the return of the Lord? Because that happens at the end. You got to go through all this stuff. Well, yeah, I believe. Absolutely. Well, or during that holiday, I personally think it's Rosh Hashanah, but yeah, any of the tabernacles. So, yeah, so I don't know. Okay, so that's the black horse. And then there's the famed pale horse, followed by Hades and death, or followed by death and Hades. Revelation 6:8 says, and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto him over a fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger and death, with the beasts of the earth. Okay, so this guy's going to come and kill a quarter of the population of the earth, right? No, it doesn't say that, but that's what we've been taught. It says, and power was given unto them over a fourth part of the earth, comma, to kill with the sword and with hunger and with death and with the beasts of the earth. He has power over a quarter part of the earth. It doesn't say he's going to kill, I mean, and he may. It doesn't say he's going to kill a quarter of the people. It says there will be death, and there will be pestilence, and there will be stuff. But we always read that wrong, because we'll get to it later where there's a future event where a third of everything goes, and then a third, and then a third. That's not this. This is the pale horse. You don't want to be here for the pale horse if you can avoid it. But this is before chapter 14. So I'm guessing we will not be able to avoid it. But it says he's given over to him power for a fourth part of the earth. So that means 3/4 of the earth he doesn't have control over. Well, the Bible is centered on the Middle East. So when the pale horse comes, my guess is it's not to Cincinnati. It's probably to Damascus, to Jerusalem, to Abu Dhabi, to, it's in the Middle East, right? I'm guessing it's centered in Jerusalem because the Bible is Israel-centric. It's Middle Eastern-centric. If the Antichrist is Syrian, is Turkish, and his main goal is to eliminate the Hebrews, well, this guy's not going to come to London. I mean, it will affect all the world, but that's not his focus. And it's interesting, we've all heard the term Hades, and you know where that comes. This verse, translated in English as hell, but it's the Greek word Hades. So we get, okay, so what does Hades mean? The abode of the dead, right? It's a bad place. You don't want to live there. Well, that's true, but the actual word means to see, to stare, to discern clearly, or to be aware. So it seems as though those people who are going to die by the sword and pestilence and animals and violence at the hands of the pale horse rider, this is not a surprise to them. They know, they can see, and perhaps it's talking about those who don't die. Maybe they can see, Maybe it's everybody knows exactly what's going on. This pale horseman is coming at the word of the Lord, and they know what their destination is, which is an interesting thought. And that's been for forever. We've talked about the first month we moved here was Columbine. And all these kids and teachers were killed. For what? But no one was lost. The only ones who died knew the Lord, except for the two. And ever since then, every time you get one of those, when you look into it, even at 9/11, there's 33,000 people that work in those buildings. How many people died? A couple thousand, 3,000 altogether, but 2,200 or something out of 33,000. And what about those ones who died? Nobody died by mistake. Most of those people who died were confessing Christians. And the others were the reverse of a confessing Christian. They followed all law. Nobody made a mistake there. Nobody died. The other 31,600 people that could have been in that building, that could have died, maybe they hadn't decided yet. So God wouldn't let them go. But the ones who had already decided, it didn't matter. They could go. And every one of those shootings and everything you see is that way. And I suspect this is the same way. And these people are going to understand their destination. They're going to see it. They're going to see it clearly. That's what Hades means. Okay, so power is given over a quarter of the earth. And I'm betting that quarter of the earth is what we call the Middle East, Asia Minor. It's that area, because that's the area the Bible has. And if, probably won't get time tonight, but if you carry that through, there's 4 horsemen. And in other places, it says each of the 4 horsemen, and it depends on how you read it, either has a quarter of the earth, or they're all in the same quarter of the earth. So think about it as if each one has a quarter of the earth. If the red horseman has, say, North America, and he's the guy that brings violence and war, can you expect to see massive violence and war? I would suggest.
Do you think we receive that as a revelation?
Maybe. I don't know. But I know if nobody's paying attention, they won't get it at all. Most Christians are going to be sitting, and most Jews as well, will be sitting in their church and temple and synagogue and whatever, and not have a clue what's going on. Why is that happening here? Why is, in the Middle East, this guy going through killing people? And why over there, maybe in Europe, is inflation so bad people can't even eat? And why in the other quarter of the world, maybe that's because that's kind of the way it reads. So, and again, it's not my only, but my main purpose in doing this stuff is just to remind you that, look, the end is coming, and it's not going to look like what you think it's going to look like. So are you going to be ready when it happens? Will you be able to discern who's God and who's not? So you've got this picture of Erdogan as a hologram. There is and again, I have no idea. I just read this. There's a project that the U.S. government has that's headquartered in Australia. It seems like all this stuff's always headquartered there. It's called Project Bluebeam. And the idea is to be able to project a huge hologram in the sky that talks to the people. Okay, so you're seeing what's going on in the world, and all of a sudden, Jesus appears and says, hey, I want you to follow this guy. And just to prove it's him, he calls down fire from heaven. You're going to fall for it? A lot will. A lot of people will. But you have to know the Bible. That's not what Jesus does. That's the other guy. But you see a big picture, and he's talking to you in English, and he's talking to those guys in Spanish, and he's talking to those guys in Canadian, about what's going to happen. Are you going to believe it, or are you going to trust the Bible? Well, if you don't know what the Bible says, how would you know? you see something like that in the sky and he calls fire down from heaven and says all this stuff, that's compelling. Yes.
Doesn't it say, I can't find it right now, that we're supposed to worship the image?
Yes, the image of the beast. And the image comes to life.
The image.
Right. Well, Erdogan, that wasn't him. That was an image. And of course, he did come. I mean, he's alive. He's still alive. So again, that's it to me, and maybe it's because I'm insecure and stupid, but I would like to know so I don't get confused. I would
You
rather,
wanna make sure it's the right one.
I know, I want to worship God, but I don't want to worship the wrong one.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know if you don't know what's coming up? Okay. Jesus will tell us, but if Jesus is in the sky telling us something,
We will know it.
maybe
His spirit in it.
maybe you'll know his voice.
Yes.
Maybe, and that's my hope. But don't you think there will be people who will be deceived?
Oh, I'm sure.
Well,
There always has been.
it's true. And I think that should be our job because we'll see the same thing.
Each one is believers have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
And
That's what we have to rely on,
Yeah.
is the Spirit leading us. But you know, from your, I mean, how many hundreds of years in church do we have in this room?
Yeah.
Most people in whatever church or it is are going to be open to deception. Maybe it's because they're like the 5 virgins and don't have the Spirit. Maybe it's because they've never read the book and don't know what it says. Maybe it's because they believed all the flannel graph simplified pictures, and I don't know why. I can't explain why. And the simplest answer is, don't worry about it. The Holy Spirit will guide you. Okay, I'm good with that.
And haven't you ever gone into a room or something and felt,
Yes,
felt some bad vibes?
exactly.
You call it?
Yeah,
You know, but if you walk into a room like this, you're not going to feel those bad vibes. You're going to feel a different.
right. And that's the hope. And perhaps that makes all this irrelevant. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe
It does.
Maybe the Spirit will guide us.
People.
But for me, like I say, maybe I have no faith or insecure or just really dumb. I think I need to know, so I'm not going to make that mistake. Okay, so let's go on. These are still the things that are happening before the rapture, if chapter 14 is the rapture. Chapter 7 talks about the sealing of the 144,000 Hebrews, 12,000 from every tribe. Chapter 8 is the famous silence in heaven for a half an hour. And then this is followed, which is why I jokingly say there's no women or children in heaven. It's because it's quiet. Can you imagine a room full of women and children that's quiet for a half an hour? I don't think so. Okay, but look, that's not actually biblical. Don't, all right. Okay, so the silence in heaven for half an hour. And then this is chapter 8 is where we learn of the destruction of a third of the trees and a third of the green grass, a great mountain burning with fire that's cast into the sea, and a third of the sea animals are killed. A great star from heaven that falls on the rivers and the fountains of water and destroys a third part of them, killing many men. And a third of the sun and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the day has not shone for a third of it. Okay, that's a pretty wild time. And we can almost get behind all the, the things that are destroying a third of this and a third of that and a third of this. But tell me how the sun will only shine 2/3 of the time. Tell me how the moon will only shine 2/3 of the time. Because everything we've been taught about, our cosmology says that's not possible. It can't just shut on and off. Okay, maybe. Sure, maybe. I would suggest that everything, and I've suggested this before 150 times for the last 30 years, that the stuff they've taught us is a lie. We did not come from the goo to the zoo to you. We didn't evolve. The universe is not continually expanding at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I mean, all the stars are in the same place. Everything's the same. All of the stuff they have taught us, I believe, and I could easily make a case for, and hopefully you would believe, is a lie. Okay, so if that's a lie, what's the truth? And the Bible lays out a different scenario. It talks about a firmament over the earth, and it talks about basically I even hate to say it, a flat earth. It talks about all of this. We're not moving in the Bible. Everything's moving around us, right? But the world has taught us that we're spinning at 66,600 miles an hour. Some math there. We're tilted over at 66.5 or 66.6 degrees. It's like
666.
so everything about it is 666.
Why would we have seasons if we were spinning like that?
Well, yeah, none of it makes sense. When in a place where we live, you can go out and look at the stars, which I like to do often, and the North Star never moves, right? It's always north. It's right there. And you've seen the pictures where they do the time release, whatever you call those things, time lapse. Thank you. Photographs, and you've got the one star in the center of the North Star, and everything's spinning around it. Okay, well, you carry that out, and the different things that you can glean from Scripture, and you kind of get the idea that these luminaries are put in the sky, right? It calls the sun and the moon and the wandering stars, which we call planets, and calls them luminaries in the sky. And they're available to be turned on and off. God can use them as he sees fit, because he put them there for what? For signs, to tell us stuff, to speak to us, to warn us. And if you've, do you guys, like me, love to go out and watch the red moons and the eclipses and all that stuff?
I haven't seen a red moon yet.
Really?
I've seen something that they said was red moon. I don't know if it was a cloud or whatever.
Yeah.
That just.
Well, where were you in 2015 when we had 4 of them for every feast?
Yeah,
It was awesome.
I don't know.
That'll happen again in 2032, by the way, on the feast days.
No, it is.
Okay, so but the point is this. You see that the moon's there, the sun's there, the earth's in the middle. That's how you get an eclipse, right? Well, before that, if you look, your shadow's going that way. The sun's over there. Well, how do you get that if the shadows go that way or this way? Or the shadows almost never line up with where the sun should be. And we never think about it because it happens, it's several hours prior when the sun was out and but you watch the shadows and then the eclipse is over there. Well, that's not possible. It can't happen that way. You can't have a star just parked in the middle of, you can't. Why did Nimrod build a building so big that Erdman, Alfred Edersheim, said it was 100 miles on a side and 12,000 feet tall? Because he thought he could break through the firmament and kill God. There's a whole different cosmology out there that we know very little about. And if you start to think it through, all it does is solidifies the fact that everything they've told you is a lie. So if that's true, I can tell you that's true. Everything they've told us is a lie. As far as how all the whole biblical cosmology thing works, I got some of it, but I can't answer everything. But I know it's not what they say it is. And so when this happens, and this I think is, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, this is one of these things that I think this is why we have to be here. Because we're going to see all of a sudden the sun go out for a third of the day. The moon go out for a third of the night. We're going to see a third of the star. And maybe it is something as simple as a volcano and the sky is darkened. Maybe. But what if the sky is clear and all of a sudden the sun goes out? Is that going to rock your world? Well, that's the thing. Don't let it rock your world. Stuff is going to happen that we won't have an answer for. So you need to be able to go into Scripture and find it and see what it says. And is that guy up there in the sky who says he's Jesus really Jesus? And if you do the things that he's telling you to do, is that what it says in the Bible? Okay, so we don't have time to do this, and I promised we would do this last week. Erdogan, the Antichrist, and I mentioned, because I think it's fascinating, that the Muslims, of course, have an end times deal, just like we do, and they have an end times scenario. And I'm going to, I promise, next week I will do this. I will go through the Muslim end times scenario and let you see how it compares with ours. And you will be flabbergasted, unless you already know this. Okay, we'll do this next week because it's awesome. It's so much fun. So when you're talking about Jasher and Enoch and Jubilees and all these other books, you know, extra biblical books, one of those extra biblical books that you might want to add to the list is the Quran. Because the Quran was written by Muhammad in 630, whatever it was, AD. It was written hundreds, thousands of years after, in some case, many thousands of years after all of this biblical stuff. You know, certainly what we call the Bible, all the extra biblical books. So he had all those available to him. And Muhammad lived in Mecca, which was a crossroads, a trading route. And he discovered that he couldn't deal with the Hebrews, or they wouldn't deal with him because he wasn't Jewish. And the Christians wouldn't deal with him because he wasn't Christian. So being a good businessman, he decided he's going to make up his own book. And he had all this stuff to draw from. And the things that he drew from it are amazing. And there have always been, you know, the Muslims make a big deal about a modest dress for women. And of course, they go way overboard on it because they take the human understanding rather than the godly understanding. Say, well, if you got to be modest, let's just put her in a potato shack. You know, that a woman should submit to her husband. Well, that means we can beat him. You know, they always put the human, they take God out of the equation. But the things that they say are often based right out of the Bible, right? And this end times thing is just another one of these. It's interesting. It's interesting to me because as I read, you know, Enoch and all these other things, it's interesting to me that how they understood it. You know, it may or may not be true, but they understood things in a certain way. And it's interesting to me to see how Muhammad, who had access to all these books, but had no relationship himself with the Lord, understood all this stuff and how that extrapolated out as he wrote his book. And I, of course, am not, you know, encouraging you to become a Muslim, but the fact that it was written, you know, so many thousands of years after, just, it's just the way he understood it. It's the way people of the time understood this stuff.
Was it prior to Abraham?
The Quran?
Yeah.
No. Abraham was
Yeah.
thousands of years before Muhammad. But of course, Abraham figures prominently, and Jesus figures prominently in the end times. He comes back with the Mahdi. I mean, they come back together, right? And anyway, I want you to remember the holograph in the sky is talking to you. He's asking you to do something. Because as the Muslims understand the end, that's exactly what happens. Is Jesus says, you know, the end of their scenario is the Mahdi asks Jesus to lead the Bible study. And Jesus backs off and says, no, I'm not worthy. You lead it. And he tells his people to worship the Mahdi. Well, what happens if this hologram of Jesus in every language of the country says, I'm Jesus and I want you to follow this guy. And everything this guy has done is right out of the book. I mean, close enough to right out of the book. How many people would fall for that? And you're worshiping the Antichrist. And it's just that simple. It can happen that quickly and be that easy if you don't know what's going on.
But he'd never say that.
Of course he wouldn't. But how many people do you know that if Jesus appeared in the sky and said, I want you to do this for me, that they would do it?
Because they know so little.
Because they know so little about the Bible.
Well, he did say that people
Would be deceived. Exactly. Okay, let me finish this up real quick. This is all before the rapture in chapter 14. Chapter 9, a star falls from heaven to open the bottomless pit and release the locusts, which will sting men for 5 months and they will not be able to die. They will seek death, but it will not come to them. Their king is Abaddon, the destroyer in Hebrew, or Apollyon, the destroyer in Greek. That's Apollyon is the word in Greek for destroyer. Abaddon is the word for destroyer in Hebrew. And if Revelation is truly chronological, we will be here for that. And this happens over the course of 13 months, and it says they will kill a third of mankind. Revelation 9:20 and 21. And the rest, this is after that, and the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of silver, gold, brass, and stone, and of wood, which can neither see, nor hear, nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, or of their sorceries, or of their fornications, or of their thefts. And just a little side note, sorceries is the word pharmakia, drugs, vaccines, I might add. So what's the deal with that? After all this happens, and these people see all this, and they still repent not? Who are these people? So the question then becomes, does that mean if we're still here, because the rapture hasn't happened for 3 more chapters or 4 more chapters, what does that say for us? So I suggest that hopefully this means we are set aside, we're protected, we're in some way immune, whatever, because all of these people did not repent. Well, we're not in that boat. We don't need to repent like that. We already follow the Lord, and we're not spoken about in this. So I hopefully that will give some comfort. We don't have the mark of the beast. Exactly, but that doesn't happen yet. That's after this. Chapter 10, let's see. So chapter 10 is seven angels, but John is told not to write what these 7 angels tell him. And in verse 7 of chapter 10, it says, "But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants, to the prophets." Well, is that the rapture? What is that? It's finished? I don't know. I can't even give you an answer for that. If Revelation is chronological. Chapter 11 is back to where we started, the 2 witnesses for a year or 3.5 years. Chapter 12 is the Hebrews flee for 3.5 years. Chapter 13 is the mark of the beast. And then comes chapter 14, the rapture. So if it's chronological, all those things will happen before we go. Now, will they happen to us? We're promised tribulation, but we're not promised wrath.
Right.
So these things that are wrath, I don't think happen to us. These things that are tribulation, the 4 horsemen, those are tribulation. We get to see that. And it will, and I guess my proof text would be, if I had to have one, is from Exodus. You've got the 10 plagues, right? Well, the Hebrews shared with the Egyptians the first 3 plagues, but from the next 7 they were protected. And perhaps that's the same picture we see here. We're going to see the 4 horsemen, we're going to see all that stuff, but I think, I hope, I pray that we are going to be protected from the wrath. That doesn't mean we'll be gone. We'll still be here, but somehow I think, because the Hebrews are still in Egypt through all these plagues. It's not like they didn't see it. And they were there for a purpose, so that the Egyptians could look down at Goshen and say, well, that's not happening to them. I want that God. I want to be with that guy. And doesn't it make sense? That's how it will be with us. If we're here for all this stuff that happens up until chapter 14, but we're protected from much of it, people are going to look and go, well, I want what he's got. And isn't that the purpose?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. So the white horseman is generally considered to be the Antichrist, but not all people think that, just so you know. Some people think he's the Messiah. Jesus comes to conquer. I don't think it fits, but some people think that. Some people think it's Trump because he's conquered. Whatever. You have to think about that on your own. Okay, Revelation 6:2, and I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow and a crown, and he was given him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. I would encourage you to read Zechariah chapter 6. No, I'm sorry, Zechariah 6, chapter 6 and chapter 1. And you'll find that those creatures, while they're horses of the same basic color, they're there to keep watch on the earth. So I don't know that those are the same guys. In Ezekiel, though, let me read this, 14:21. For thus saith the Lord God, how much more when I send my 4 judgments upon Jerusalem, the sword, the famine, the noisome beast, and the pestilence, to cut it off from man and beast. So in Ezekiel, he seems to be identifying with those same 4 horsemen in Revelation. And they do the same thing, but he describes them. You should read Ezekiel chapter 1, I think, about what those look like. And it's certainly not a horse, giddy up, I'm galloping through the field. It's a different deal. So, okay. All right. Well, that's probably it for tonight. Oh, we have so much good stuff for next week. Wow. Isaiah 18. Read Isaiah 18. It's awesome. And tell me who you think it is. And we'll read Psalm 83. And okay. So anyway, that's it for today.